How's it going? This is part two of psychological warfare, and I'd like to go into what's happening this month and the whole love is love and LTGB XYZ thing. And I'm going to go into why they chose this month, um, what the symbolism is, um, why they specifically use the word pride, and the reasons behind this whole psychological movement. Um, and I guess I'll just start off. It's pretty obvious to the people who have common sense, um, morals, and good observational skills. I mean, it's pretty obvious when you think about what's happening and the wordplay and psychological use behind all of this stuff going on. Um, all of it's designed to break America from the inside out and other Western countries. And if you take close observation as to what's happening in other countries, namely in Asia, like Russia and China, you can see how at the same time they're making their boys more manly and their military stronger, while here they're doing the complete opposite. Um, this is all foreign influence, and it all started and stems off from the 50s um, during the whole communist invasion. You know, some people look back and they go, oh, it was just a time when America was paranoid. But no, they found actual communists and people who wanted to change the ideology in America. The whole reason that people fought in the wars and lost their lives was to protect American freedom. And other countries hate that because they figure that seeing America stand with its people that have freedom, it's going to have a negative impact on their own power structure that they have over the people of those civilizations. And it's methodically and strategically used in order to stick a wedge into society and into Western culture and values, which have spread freedom and so much more technological advantages. I mean, you can go on across the world. And the reason why it is such a threat is because they don't want people to have their own freedom. They want to remain in control over the masses because that is their power struggle. And people who rise up against that become the enemy. And as you can see, how countries like Russia and China and Iran and a lot of Middle Eastern states, um, they want absolute control over the people. And one thing they've always had in common is trying to find weaknesses in America. And they found weaknesses. And it comes in the form of socialism, Marxism, communism, um, so many different isms that seem attractive to the young groups because they've also exploited the fact that they can turn the rebellious instincts in young people against their parents. And this has been experimented on by Democrats for the longest time, ever since, the 50s and 60s when socialism and communism really came to America. And some in some ways it sounds cliche, and I have to admit when I was younger it seemed so cliche, and it was just like, oh no, it's just adults telling us what to do. But it's really major power structures trying to tell people what to do and tell the youth what to do. And they use reverse psychology, as I got on earlier in one of the other episodes. And all you really have to do is observe, look through history, and you start seeing the patterns, and you start seeing where they're poking and prodding at, the culture here. The one culture that's been more productive than any other in history, in the entire history of the world. And they see that as a threat. And you can see why, how many wars has America won? If it wasn't for the United States in World War II, then there would have been no victory. and everyone in Europe and probably Asia and Africa would all be speaking German, um, against their will, and their histories would be erased. They'd have ultimate allegiance to it, at their own detriment, um, while being unaware at the same time. It's important to look at history and to see the exploits, and a lot of it is used also through spirituality, because they understand that the power religion has over the mind. It can be altered and exploited and used, and they do use it. And it's no coincidence why all these movements go back to the 50s and 60s, and they were all designed to create instability. Um, some of the movements, and many of the movements, they're used to manipulate emotion. And emotion and instinct are some of the most basic of human thinking, mentality, and a useful order of operation that's instilled within all people. And the same reason they use, sex and violence and drugs in TV and movies is because it's so instinctual. Drugs are used to manipulate feeling and emotion, uh, which is what it does. And sex drive is one of the most basic instincts of all of them because it's survival first. A species cannot survive without sex, without reproduction. That's the number one drive for people, followed second only by eating and food. It's basically food, sex, shelter, and everything else starts piling underneath it. And those are the most basic of instincts, and they're used on purpose and specifically. You know, a lot of the movies that people like, um, they only like because of the things that are contained in it, not even really the storyline. It's the imagery, because you know the eyes take up the highest percentage of your senses, and that can easily be manipulated. It's why there are crazy people out there who are like sexually attracted to cartoons and stuff like that. It's a very instinctual, basic drive that can be heavily manipulated, um, visually, and anything that humans react to can be exploited. Like I said in the previous video, that um, humans tend to forget that they are basic animals and they have all these drives that can be manipulated, which leads them to be the most manipulated. People who forget what they are and where they are often the most manipulated, and it should be so obvious. And people don't want to admit that, and they don't want to admit that subliminal messaging is real, and brainwashing is a real thing. And they don't want to feel like they are manipulated. Meanwhile, they're manipulated every single day by ads and by commercials and by external forces that have ulterior motives. It doesn't really take a genius to see any of this. It just takes an observant, honest mind to really be able to take your environment, question it, and see what's happening around you. That's one of the skills that they've been slowly chipping away at, and for reason, because they understand without observational skills and critical thinking, then you are a subordinate. And there's ways to slowly attack people at their moral core. And one of those things also is to slowly take away the feeling of responsibility and the feeling of having purpose in life. Because if you have no purpose in life, then there is no purpose to life. These are very, very simple concepts that most people overlook because they are very distracted in their own lives, and they like to believe that they are in total control. And in many ways, that could not be further from the truth. And so the real manipulation and manipulative tactics that scientifically have been pushing forward have been in the 50s and 60s. And they get more and more sophisticated and complicated as time goes on, which makes the average person less and less aware that it's actually happening to them. And I can go back and point out LSD, for instance. Um, you see hippies all over the place praise it like it's a divine entity, like it's a god, like it's everything. Even the same with marijuana. They praise it like it's something else. And what is it doing? It's altering their perception, their mind, and replacing thought with emotion and more instinct. Um, I understand what it's like. You know, I've done drugs in my life. I've experienced many things, um, but I'm also not um, someone who just takes things at face value. Because the further you deep dive into history, the more you can see that a lot of it was planned. And the people who think that they were so free and able to do acid and free their minds and become something else is all a lie. It was really all the CIA. And it was government agencies that were giving these drugs out to people at concerts and observing them. They were experimental rats, is what they were. And they were seeing what kind of effects it would have. You know, one of the main things is they were hoping it would become some sort of docile brainwashing tool in order to, you know, get kids to join the military and become these structured, um, malevolent beings. When in reality it was just all experimentation, and it started in the 50s, not even the 60s. It started in the 50s. They started giving it to um, students and volunteers, and these were all to see what the effects were. And then after seeing some of the effects and studying, they decided to give it out to the masses. And one way that you can make people susceptible to things is to give them a choice and tell them that it's the newest thing and that people like them are doing it. These are all tactics used, and a lot of the people, and even people and professors who are giving these out as experiments, started becoming victim themselves to it. And I think it's really important to take note of all these things. It's not some mystical, magical, um, godlike substance. It's really just a tool. And there are proper and improper ways to use tools. However, most people use tools improperly, especially if they've never been told how to use a tool. Um, like I said before in the other video, the brain is a tool, and human life and the human brain does not actually come with a manual. So people have to figure these things throughout life and what it is. And the more people are taken away from their natural external environment, the more they become susceptible to other things in their life, and other influences, especially, you know, by big corporations who hire psychologists and psychiatrists to further push their goal of incentivizing sales. All of it. As you can see right now, you can go onto Facebook or other social media. I mean, I don't know how far in the future people are watching this video, but all they're doing during this month is trying to push ads and sales, um, all designed around the LTGB imagery. And that's done for no other reason than to try to scoop in the money and hook people on and to buy things. And going back to the 50s and 60s, as I was mentioning before, They have had psychologists and psychiatrists working on ways to further push movements and to get into the minds of Americans and alter their state of thinking. And all of this is connected, and they've been doing it in shows, in cartoons, in programs ever since. Um, the television was invented as a way to try to control the mind, and they've been trying to do it ever since. Russians created it during the mind experiments they were doing back in the day. Um, People have tried using lights and flashing and imagery for these tactics for as long as it's been around. It's a mystical, amazing thing that people take for granted now. When people don't understand they're being manipulated, that's when they are the most susceptible to being manipulated. It's why scientists try to find more about the brain all the time and to try to understand it and to see how they can manipulate the alpha, mega, alpha, beta, omega, and gamma rays and waves that the brains give off. Um, and it's different than the alpha, beta, omega waves that are in radiation and stuff like that. It's a totally different set. So try not to get those confused. I'm not conflating here. And so what have they been trying to do? Outside influences since the 50s and 60s. They've been trying to influence Americans and change the way they've been thinking. And to be honest, it's been pretty successful, especially recently. And they'll use all sorts of new age hip movements in order to do so. Using even taglines and phrases that they repeat in repetition on purpose, because one of the first steps of brainwashing is repetition, and saying stuff like love is love. And to prove that love is not just love and all love is the same, ask yourself these questions. Do you love your pets or animals the same as you do your siblings, as the same you do with your partners or husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend? Do you love them the same way that you love your parents? Is this all interchangeable? And if so, that means, you must be okay with bestiality and pedophilia and incest. Because if love is love, then there's no difference, right? These are the mind tricks that they play on people. They try to convince people that there is no compartmentalizing between different things in the world. And so you can just start manipulating the brain and confuse the brain to the point where you can have influence on it. And people who say that, TV and media and radio and any form of media is not a way to influence people, they are being dishonest. They are lying, and those are the people you should not trust, because they're denying even to themselves that that's how things work. It's easily seen. What do especially young people, what do they do when they're growing up? They mimic what they see on TV. They mimic the way that people act and dress with the musicians and artists they like, the ones who have influenced them. There's a reason why they call them influencers. And there's this whole new wave of internet influencers, because people realize, hey, companies are going to pay me to act any way that either I or they choose, and I can make money off it. Of course they're going to do that. That's how they manipulate people, with money as well. It's been the same since the beginning of history. People will manipulate other people. That's how slavery was around. People will get weaker people to make them do their bidding for them. That's why slavery existed in every single culture. It existed in every nation. It existed within the same cultures of other people. Black people enslaved black people. Asians enslaved Asians. White people enslaved white people. And all of those have enslaved other races. Because if you look back in time, we come from a natural place where we're just animals roaming around, and things are difficult, especially when there was no machinery. It's like the amount of work and labor that had to be put into something in order to accomplish it. Well, the easiest way to do that would be gathering up and rounding up people and making them do it for them by threatening their lives, threatening their livelihood, their family, anything that they loved or held dear. It's nothing to do with white people whatsoever. It has to do with society as a whole throughout the world. Um, and one way they try to use these tactics is to brainwash people and victimize themselves and say that there's a bigger threat. And it's usually whatever the majority is, whatever country you're in. The people who manipulate and try to impose Marxism, socialism, all these other isms are just saying, hey, we're being mistreated by this group, so now they are the enemy, when that's not always true. Largely, it has to do with the economic situation of any given country, um, the resources, and how those are used and allocated, and who is taking advantage of it. Um, there are people that are always trying to take advantage of any system, no matter what, and no matter where it is. Um, it's hardly anything that's unique to Western civilization in any regard. And it's a tactic that's used. Not only have black families mostly suffered from a lot of the civil rights movement by making them dependent on welfare and the government and keeping them down and using Planned Parenthood to exterminate, eradicate, and keep their populations low. The same is true today. And you notice that it always comes from people who claim to be on the left side, the people who use socialism and other authoritarian states in order to control. And socialism is an authoritarian state. It's used to make it sound like it's for everybody and it's a social aspect, but it's not. The Nazis were socialists. They were socialists. And now you see people young today that are saying, hey, we want socialism. It's like, no, you don't. You don't know history and you don't realize the impact of what you're saying. The same is true with communism. Um, the Nazi, the word Nazi literally stands for National Socialist Workers' Party. Um, and if you want to go even further, it's National Socialist German Workers' Party, originally under the name DAP, DAP. And people don't realize this. They're being lied to by professors and scholars and other people who have come from other countries or are working behind the scenes as bad actors for other countries. And their whole goal is to try to come here, steal technology, warp the minds of the young, and try to slowly convert them to their own beliefs. So then they can try to topple the government system, especially with how much time it takes. They don't care. They're very patient, and they use tactics and techniques like death by 1,000 cuts, to where they'll slowly take chops out over and over again. You know, the same way that a lumberjack will try to cut down a tree. It's done chop by chop and slice by slice, not one giant swing, because they know it'll never work that way. And so they want to take down America from the inside out, along with other countries. It's part of their very long-term goal. And the main culprit right now is definitely China. Russia is definitely a big influence too. And I think the people there know it as well. They're being oppressed and suppressed. And look at their values and family value structures. They are strong, and they purposely make them strong. So it's harder for other countries to take over, because they understand that a nuclear family is one of the strongest bonds that can ever exist. And then what do? They try to break families apart. They try to divide families on purpose so they can break down the higher structure, because if you kill the roots of a tree, it's going to eventually come down, and it'll be rotting from the inside out. And this is a visualization of the techniques they use. And the same is true with this entire gay pride movement. And to go into the symbolism behind all this. It's why they choose to use words like pride, because pride is symbolically known as sinful, and they use that on purpose. And it's why they chose June as the symbol too, because if you go into astrology, you can see that it's multiple personality trait. It has very high bisexual implications, and this all comes down to symbolism and satanic teachings. And it doesn't matter if you believe in Satan or not. It doesn't matter if you're religious or not, or if you believe in religion or not. They do. And they believe in symbolism, and they use symbolism on everything. So does the Chinese government. It's all about symbolism. It's all about numbers. It's all about matching things up with numerology. And astrology and numerology is one of the oldest known sciences known to man throughout history. This is all used in order to get at the mind, because the mind tries to use symbolism subconsciously to figure everything out, like patterns and pattern recognition. It's instilled in us from when we had to go and search for plants and edible foods in nature. It was of dire consequence to remember and not forget the patterns in leaves and plants and colors and seeds and flowers and even animals. Why do you think that the most colorful animals, bright and neon animals, are usually the most poisonous and deadly? It's because the brain picks those patterns up to know to either stay away from them or if they're okay to eat. Even if we have changed our diets and we have changed things, from thousands and hundreds of years ago, our brains came from that development, and all those things are still within side of our heads and our brains and our minds. And it's really important to remember this. And they want to, and when I say they, it's foreign influence. They want to destroy the mind, destroy the family, and destroy morality, so everything else crumbles, because that is the base and the root of everything. And as far as you want to not be religious or whatever, this country was founded with Christian ideology and beliefs, which came from Judaism, and which came from, if you even want to call them, prophets or sons of God or whatever they were, like Moses. The Ten Commandments is a way, especially back then, for people to remain in peace and harmony, especially when disease was running rampant. And now we're seeing an escalation of diseases, of STDs, of all these new things that have come out, COVID and beyond. It's all designed to destroy Western civilization. So don't fall for it. Stand up against it. Speak your mind. Be critical to everything around you and your environment, and make sure that you keep your head on. Because now they're infiltrating all the cartoons where they're sexualizing little kids. People who say love is love are pedophile predators. They have no moral standards, or they're being slowly brainwashed to not have moral standards, and it's all designed to break this country from the inside out. It's a reason, like, it's no coincidence why the 60s happened right after the 50s, and during the 50s there was the communist invasion in America, with Hollywood actors and musicians and people known to associate with communists. And into the 60s, like I mentioned before, it goes even further into that, because that's when you started seeing, operations like former military intelligence and CIA officers create something called the Process Church. And the Process Church was another way to brainwash people. And the process church eventually became the Church of Satan. And it was in Hollywood. And they recruited, using drugs and fame, recruited as many people from Hollywood as they could. Um, and everything has been around in early Hollywood, even pedophilia. Even um, Shirley Temple was sexually assaulted when she was like 10 or 11 years old. Look it up. And this is something that's been going on for a long time. When they have people that are exploited, young people like Brooke Shields, look that up. And then look up what she was doing later in life, in like the 80s when she was, you know, an adult and she started having sexual relations with children and young people. Um, this is no coincidence. All of this is by design, and Hollywood is a huge culprit, and you can see them doing it now with their fake woke um, projections, and people need to be more observant. They need to look at history. They need to do research. They need to think critically about everything and their surroundings so you don't end up a victim, so you don't end up a complicit drone. Um, what are they doing now? Now they, during gay pride parades, they're literally having open sex in the middle of the road, in streets, with children there watching, probably also taking part in that behavior. They're predators. They're literal predators. And they have no moral standards because they've been compromised. They've been either um, abused themselves, uh, physically or emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And people behind these programs understand the detriment that can be caused by attacking all these things that people hold dear um, inside them and subconsciously. It's a way to break down the id and the ego and everything that makes up your mentality. This is all psychological warfare that's been taking place. There's no such thing as love is love. There's different types of love. And if you conflate the different types of love there is, then you start becoming a victim of this mentality. If you can't compartmentalize all these different aspects, then you will succumb to this new age psychological movement that's out to just destroy. And another reason they push it further is because what they're doing to young people is making it so they lose all faith in everything. They have no future goals. They have nothing set for themselves. They make them feel dire, like the future is useless. They strip away everything that has meaning to them. They manipulate them to the point of insanity and disconnect. And it becomes absolutely devastating to the people. And then what happens? They have kids that end up just as bad or worse. And you see it in Hollywood. You know, all the people that were like victimized and abused behind the scenes are now like having abused children, and their children want to do stuff like change their sexuality, which is impossible, and cut off their genitals and body parts, and they think it's okay to inject, you know, prepubescent hormone blockers so they don't grow up having a sexuality and having an identity, and they attack their identity and try to make it so they believe that it can be altered beyond their own perception. It's what happens when a lot of people do heinous crimes. They want to escape from who they are, from what they think they were. Caitlyn Jenner is a good example of that, where he ended up changing his sexuality and identity after he killed and ran somebody over. Things like that have a huge impact on the mind, and people forget how deep psychology goes. It's enrooted in all human beings and sentient organisms. It's absolutely devastating. It can be controlled and manipulated if you don't have the control and willpower yourself. Then you will be a pawn in the bigger scheme and game in order to make everyone else a pawn so that the people in power can stay in power without question. That's what a lot of it is about too. It's about keeping the power and having nobody question you, just follow you. And you have to take that into consideration. It's like, do you really believe that the people higher up give a shit about you? You think they really care in any way? No, they don't care about you. They never did, and they never will. The only thing they want from you is votes or submission. And that's what's happening now. They're behind the scenes pulling all the strings and fooling many, many people. But there are so many people that are aware of it. And I don't think they fully know how to word it and phrase it and put it out there. And that's one of the reasons why I'm making these videos too, to kind of, let people know that there's ways to explain it, and there's ways to talk about it, and there's ways to bring awareness to what's going on. It's like, why is mental illness rising at an astronomical rate as never seen before in history? And why are so many young people being prescribed drugs, random new drugs that have never existed in history before? They're experimenting on people, and it's really messing them up. It's messing them up beyond their own control. And they end up taking all these things from ADHD medicine to bipolar medicine and antipsychotic medicine. It's like, why are people getting so crazy? They're unaware that they're being pulled and ripped from their environments and their natural environments, that it puts them in a state of craziness. The same thing happens with lab rats. The same thing happens with other animals. If you take animals out of their natural environment, put them in some, cage-like environment, a home-like environment, they act so much different. And it can be extremely stressful to the point where they don't even know what's going on. Some animals become unpredictable and violent. Some become super submissive and dependent. And the same thing has happened and can happen with human beings, because we're just animals. And we don't live in our natural environment anymore. We're taken out of it. And we're told to do all these unnatural things and to follow these unnatural edicts, laws, and mandates. It's very chaotic. And a lot of people can't deal with that. And a lot of people don't even understand that or even where to begin thinking about it. They just know that they're anxious. They're anxious all the time, or they're nervous. It's like, and then they ask for drugs to calm that are all experimental. Biological chemistry has only been around for a little while, less than 100 years or so, give or take. So this is all experimental stuff. Even the medication that's been around for decades and decades is still experimental. It's absolutely absurd once you start realizing reality, accepting reality, and understanding everything that's going on, questioning things and being very critical about what's happening around you. A lot of people get scared once they start doing that, and they'd rather just, that's a lot of the reason why a lot of people are alcoholics, or drug addicts or abusers, because they can't deal with reality and they don't feel like they can escape, and they don't feel like they have a future, and they feel like it's, a losing battle, so they'd rather just forget about it and be a drone for life until they have to die, which they don't want to think about either. And so it strips away all responsibility. It strips away any sense of leaving an impact, especially a positive impact. It's one of the reasons why people believe that doing negative things and bad things is just so much easier than doing good things, because there's a certain amount of responsibility and willpower you need in order to do good. Anyone can do bad and steal and call names and not really care about their surroundings, become willfully ignorant, not want to think about things, because it's a lot less complicated to do nothing than it is to do something. That's why a lot of people, they run from jobs and responsibility. They run from doing chores. They run from pretty much anything that takes them out of a drone-like state. And people who understand the psychology exploit all of this. They're paid to do so. And it's destroying families, destroying nations, destroying cooperation, destroying goals that people have, life achievements that people should aspire to, and it all comes at the detriment of society and its people. And it's really, really important to understand this, to see this, to talk about it, to have conversations that bring up these things, because what you're seeing now is every form of exploitation. You know, it's really absurd. You start seeing these corporations using black people and gay people and everyone else they can as fodder for sales, for pushing their product. It's like you don't see more LTGB stuff than you do in June when companies are trying to sell goods, especially while there's a recession and inflation and economic collapse happening. They're so desperate that they need all that stuff. And they think it works, and sometimes it actually does work. Social media is absolutely destructive. And you'll notice too, the same people who say that you shouldn't judge and you shouldn't call names or be mean or whatever are doing the same exact to anyone who thinks differently than them. Whether you want to call it traditionally, independently, critically, or any other word besides, you know, being part of the hive mind. And a lot of the young people fall for it because they don't want to be ostracized. They want to be part of it. They don't want to feel left out. And it takes a strong mind and a strong person to go against the grain and to stand up and say, no, that's wrong, and I'll prove it to you, and I'll show you. And that's another reason why I try to make these videos. I think it's really important that people open up their mind and think critically, because the people who say they have the most open minds are usually the most closed mind because they're doing exactly as the programs tell them to. It's like, you know, writing scripts for a computer program. As long as you know how to do it, you can control the mind of the computer. And the same is true with humans, you know, and people are constantly trying to find ways to exploit this. It's why I don't watch TV. It's why I don't watch mainstream media, mainstream news. I look for sources and I hunt for the facts and history because it's there. You just need to know where to look, and you've got to search and search for it. But the more you start seeing where reality was and is, the less susceptible to all this brainwashing nonsense you become. It's all psychological warfare, all of it, all propaganda. The same way that governments want citizens to join the army is the same reason candy companies want you to buy their products, the same reason why people try to sell clothes and any other product you can imagine. They need money, they need sales. And the problem with a lot of what's happening in society is they're brainwashing a lot of people into a lot of products and things that they actually don't even need at all. Things that are so useless that shut off a lot of sectors in the mind, and it really is having a huge and negative impact, especially the younger people. You know, it's like people that are under, at this point in time, under 30 years old, have no idea about the political past. They weren't around and willing enough to learn, and their brains weren't functioning to the point of clarity when like things like 9/11 happened, when Obama was in office, Bush Jr., Bush Sr., Clinton. These kids are just puppets. These people are just puppets. And depending on where they've got their education will show you what they have been programmed to believe. And the more they're programmed by having iPods and iPads, I should say, having iPads and tablets and growing up with the internet their whole lives, the more pulled away from reality they are, And that's one of the great things that I'm, glad for, is the fact that I grew up before the internet was a thing. I grew up before smartphones, and so I was able to see not only the entire evolution of what they grew up in, they don't see anything other than that. So there's this huge gap of wisdom that they fail to see, because everything they know and everything they see, I've been through too, plus more. I know what it's like before all this stuff was implemented. I know and remember what it was like when only analog toys were really around, um, or no toys that were connected to the internet anyway. And the internet is a place where all these kids now lose their innocence, and they do the craziest stuff uh, that are marking them permanently online, that they'll never be able to erase or remove. They'll never be able to escape from. They'll always be able to be tracked and hunted down. They'll always be able to be blackmailed, ostracized, or any other form of manipulation. Um, and a lot of it is because their parents don't know better. You know, um, it's really such a shame, and it's neglect to the highest degree. And we need to start being honest and truthful and real with each other in this society. Otherwise, we're just going to fall to the wayside, and other countries are going to take over, and we'll get weaker while they get stronger. And that's the goal. That's the goal, to divide us up from the inside out. American families are being chopped up and butchered left and right, because they don't know better. Um, Even the lack of tolerance people have for each other, and the way they don't thoroughly think things out. Um, it's a really sad state of affairs, and I really thought that I should bring some of this up and make another video about this because of what's currently happening right now. And remember, anyone who says woke or love is love are victims of brainwashing. They're victims of brainwashing. It's worked on them. The keys unlocked their brain, scrambled them, and hopefully they can come back to reality. Um, I've never seen so much hatred for women as I see on the left side. Now they don't even call them, they don't have respect enough to call them women. They call them birthing persons. That's disgusting. It's terrible. And tech conglomerates want more and more of that, because the more they do that, the more dependent they are on these tech conglomerates. And they're going to have more power than the government itself if we don't watch it. So this is me just being real with you. I love you all. Remember to think critically about your surroundings. Don't fall for anything. Be aware. Remember who you are, where you came from, and spread the word. Spread the word around. Because if we don't do that, then they will win. So be smart and sharp. Remember that. Love you. Take care.